want to go right now to Ronald Chapman, a federal defense attorney. He knows the ins and outs of all these things. And I was thinking, and so excited to know you were going to be here, Ron. There's a lot the former president has to juggle, down to some cases that if they were held at when the judges want to hold them or the prosecutors want to hold them, they would bump up against, the timing of key primaries and the Republican convention in Milwaukee itself. How much do courts weigh that sort of thing?
Well, in most cases, courts weigh that quite heavily. We see cases continued and adjourned based on the availability of counsel, illness of folks. I couldn't imagine what is more important than the front runner for the Republican nomination. That seems to be a suitable reason. Unfortunately, it traditionally hasn't been for the court in D.C., the federal court, as well as the courts in New York. We'll see what happens down in Florida. We should be hearing pretty soon with Jack Smith asking for a trial date of July 8th. Donald Trump hoping that that happens after the election. I imagine that that trial will not happen before the election occurs.
What about, Ron, the Supreme Court taking up oral arguments, I believe in April, the latter part of April, that week, the last week of April, on the immunity claims the former president is seeking, that I was president when a lot of this was going on, you can't touch me. Could this judge in this case, like in other cases that are coming up, Sarah, we got to wait to hear from that before we schedule anything?
Well, absolutely. That could happen in Florida, and that could be a very good reason to put it off. That's certainly what is going to happen in the D.C. federal court. Now, with respect to the Supreme Court's grant of cert, they've had an expedited briefing schedule. We're going to have argument the week of, I believe, April 22nd. The decision is going to come out sometime before June, by the end of the term. But we're dealing with the very narrow question of whether or not a president can be prosecuted for their official acts. We may very well still see, even if the Supreme Court gives Donald Trump some relief, a trial on the question of whether his statements and January 6th conduct was an official act. That may still happen, but again, going to be tough to have that before the election.
It sounds to me like there's a possibility right now, Ron, where all of these, at least the non-civil matters, which are very expensive and the most expensive of all for the former president right now, are put off or could be put up till after the election. So let's say he's elected president, if he is the Republican nominee and then goes on to win. Can he make all of those go away?
Well, with respect to the state issues, generally not. Of course, with the Fani Willis indictment, we'll see what happens later today with that.
Yeah, that might explode of its own accord, right?
Absolutely. He may not need to worry about that. But with respect to the rest of the federal things, arguably a president can tell the attorney general to get rid of a case. I don't know if he will do that. That would be different than what most presidents have done. But certainly what is true is that he could pardon himself, some have argued, or at a very least push that off until after he leaves office.
All right, Ron, thank you very much. Ron Chapman, following all of that, thank goodness, because he was making legal sense and leaking a lot of these confusing cases. But it's got to be very tough for Donald Trump, just going back and forth, going to a Florida, Fort Pierce course. Of course, you're dealing with the Mar-a-Lago thing and the separate, on we go in the travels and travails of one Donald Trump front and center with all these legal woes.